My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I'm staring down a lifetime behind bars for what the authorities call federal crimes: sabotage, theft, destruction of government assets. But the people who truly understand know the real story. I liberated an intelligent being, a Bigfoot, and if I could turn back time, I'd make that same choice without hesitation. Before everything fell apart, let me take you to the beginning. This story needs to be heard before these prison walls silence me forever. For 15 years, I built my career studying wildlife across the globe. My focus? The minds of primates, understanding just how intelligent they really are beneath our human prejudices. I documented gorilla communication patterns, analyzed chimpanzee tool-making abilities, and explored orangutan cognitive skills across 3 continents. My reputation was solid, if unremarkable. I was respected but not famous, competent but not groundbreaking. Then my phone rang one ordinary morning. The number was blocked. The voice belonged to someone claiming to represent a government research installation I'd never encountered in any professional circles. They'd acquired what they called a specimen that demanded immediate expert evaluation. Could I travel to their facility in the Pacific Northwest? When I pressed for details about this specimen, the caller went silent. The pause stretched uncomfortably before he finally spoke. It's something beyond remarkable. The compensation they offered was staggering, triple my standard consulting fees, expenses fully covered, absolute confidentiality mandatory. I accepted before fully grasping what I was stepping into. That decision altered the trajectory of my entire existence. 48 hours later, I found myself navigating through thick forest along an unmarked trail, following coordinates to a location absent from every map I'd checked. The structure that emerged was deliberately nondescript, a massive concrete building that resembled a warehouse or storage depot. Nothing suggested its true purpose. Armed security personnel examined my credentials at multiple checkpoints. Every detail screamed classified operation, the kind that officially doesn't exist. They guided me through antiseptic corridors into an observation chamber with reinforced glass panels. Beyond that barrier sat a containment space roughly 20 feet square, and there, hunched in the corner, was a Bigfoot. Listen, I'm a scientist. I don't believe in cryptids, urban legends, or monsters lurking in the shadows, but what I witnessed defied all my rational skepticism. This being was enormous, standing at least 8 feet tall even while seated. Dense brown fur covered its massive frame, matted and unkempt in patches. Those hands were incredible, twice the size of human hands, with thick digits and dark nails. The facial features created an unsettling bridge between ape and human. Prominent brow ridge, flat broad nose, thin lips, and eyes that radiated disturbing intelligence. The Bigfoot remained absolutely motionless, staring downward at the concrete floor. No reaction to my presence or to the facility director accompanying me. Something profoundly heartbreaking characterized its posture, shoulders collapsed, head bowed, completely broken in spirit. The director explained the circumstances clinically. 6 weeks prior, this Bigfoot had been captured in a remote mountain territory. Logging crews reported strange vocalizations and disappearing supplies. The facility dispatched a capture team equipped with tranquilizer darts and reinforced nets. The Bigfoot fought initially, of course it did. Who wouldn't? But 3 tranquilizer darts finally brought it down. Since that capture, this intelligent being had been imprisoned in this concrete cell under constant surveillance while the facility debated its next moves. My assignment was straightforward, they said. Assess cognitive capacity. Where did this being fall on the intelligence spectrum? Great ape level? Human level? Could it manipulate tools? Communicate abstract concepts? Understand complex ideas? They wanted answers. Fast. I spent the first 72 hours simply watching. The Bigfoot barely moved. Staff provided various foods, fruits, vegetables, raw meat, but the creature ate minimally, mechanically, without interest. Sometimes it would stand and pace the cell's perimeter, trailing one massive hand along the concrete walls in what seemed like desperate searching. Other times it would sit facing the corner for hours, completely still. The sight crushed me emotionally every single time I watched. During those initial observation sessions, I documented every behavior with meticulous detail. Sleep patterns proved irregular, brief 20 to 30-minute rest periods followed by extended wakefulness. This suggested either severe psychological stress or a naturally different circadian rhythm than humans possess. When it rested, the eyes closed, but the body remained perpetually tense, always alert to potential threats. I noticed the Bigfoot avoided the cell's center, consistently staying near walls. This behavior is textbook for captive animals experiencing acute stress. They seek boundaries for psychological security. But something differentiated this being's movements. They were calculated, deliberate. This wasn't random pacing, but systematic exploration of every inch of the enclosure, testing methodically for weaknesses or escape possibilities. On day 2, I watched the Bigfoot examine the door mechanism for over 60 minutes. Those enormous fingers traced edges, pressed against hinges, tested the frame for any give. This demonstrated clear cause and effect understanding. The being recognized the door as a barrier and was attempting to comprehend its function. When it finally moved away, visible frustration radiated from its posture. "Are you still with me?" Because this is where things get truly fascinating. Staff delivered food 3 times daily through a small slot in the door's lower section. Within 24 hours, the Bigfoot had learned this schedule completely. Before each feeding time, it would position itself near the slot, waiting with clear temporal awareness and learning capacity. But here's what struck me. It never approached the food eagerly. Instead, it would wait until the staff member departed, then slowly collect the items and relocate them to a corner before eating. This suggested something profound about dignity, privacy, or perhaps cultural norms we couldn't begin to understand. I created detailed sketches of the Bigfoot's physical characteristics. The brow ridge was prominent but less heavy than gorillas or early hominids. The nose structure was flat and broad with large nostrils. The lips were surprisingly thin, more human than ape. Small ears sat close to the head, partially concealed by fur. The overall facial architecture suggested cold climate adaptation, with minimal exposed skin to prevent heat loss. But the hands fascinated me most intensely. They were massive, palm width, easily 6 inches across, yet the proportions were remarkably human-like. The fingers were long and capable of precise movements. The thumbs were completely opposable. The palm showed callus patterns consistent with tool use and rough terrain navigation. This was not the hand of a knuckle-walking ape. This was the hand of a being adapted for manipulation and fine motor control. I spent countless hours analyzing video footage from multiple angles. When the Bigfoot walked, its gait was completely bipedal with 0 arm assistance. The stride was long and efficient. The footstrike pattern showed heel-first contact, then roll through to the toes, exactly matching human walking biomechanics. This wasn't occasional bipedalism like we observe in other apes. This was obligate bipedalism evolved over millions of years. By day 3, I'd filled 2 notebooks with observations and sketches. Every single data point converged on one conclusion. This wasn't an animal in any conventional sense. This being demonstrated problem-solving abilities, planning capacity, frustration tolerance, and behavioral inhibition, all markers of advanced cognition. But the facility director remained fixated on containment protocols and study procedures, completely ignoring what the data actually revealed. On day 4, I insisted on entering the cell for direct interaction. The director protested vehemently, citing safety protocols. We compromised. 2 armed guards would remain just outside the open door. I brought a simple puzzle box, the standard kind used for primate problem-solving assessments. An apple waited inside. The subject had to manipulate sliding panels and rotating discs to access the food. I placed it on the floor in the cell's center and stepped back. The Bigfoot completely ignored it. I waited 20 minutes. Nothing happened. I tried verbal encouragement, pointing at the box, even demonstrating the first step myself. The Bigfoot continued staring at the wall as if I didn't exist. I left the puzzle box and retreated to the observation room, frustrated and confused. An hour later, reviewing security footage, the box remained unopened. But something crucial had changed. The Bigfoot had moved it, not toward the corner where it usually sat, but directly toward the door, deliberately placed in my path, as if returning something unwanted. That changed everything in my mind. This being understood cause and effect. It understood that I had brought the box, and it was sending it back. This transcended animal behavior. This was communication, intentional, meaningful, a clear message. I don't want your tests. I shifted my entire approach. Instead of tests and puzzles, I simply sat in the cell and talked. I shared stories about my work, the animals I'd studied, why I was there. I spoke calmly and quietly, never pushing, never demanding. The Bigfoot gave no obvious indication of listening, but it also didn't retreat or turn away. Each session lasted approximately an hour. I would sit against the wall, maintaining a respectful distance of 10 to 12 feet. I kept my body language open and non-threatening, no direct stares, no sudden movements. I talked about neutral topics initially: the weather, the forest outside, descriptions of other places I'd worked. The Bigfoot remained motionless, facing away from me. On day 5, I shifted to more personal narratives. I described my first gorilla encounter in Rwanda, how terrifying and exhilarating it had been simultaneously. I recalled the moment a silverback approached me, stopping mere inches away, close enough that I could feel its breath. I'd frozen, overwhelmed with primal fear, until the gorilla simply touched my shoulder gently before moving on. That moment had permanently transformed how I understood animal intelligence. As I spoke, I noticed subtle shifts in the Bigfoot's posture. The shoulders relaxed fractionally. The breathing slowed and deepened. It was listening, even without outward acknowledgement. I continued sharing experiences: bonobos in the Congo, orangutans in Borneo, chimpanzees in Tanzania. I talked about what I'd learned from each species, how they'd taught me to recognize intelligence in forms different from my own. On day 6, something shifted noticeably. I was mid-sentence, describing a particularly clever problem-solving behavior I'd witnessed in a young chimp, when the Bigfoot's head turned slightly. Not enough to face me directly, but enough to bring me into its peripheral vision. It was acknowledgement, recognition that I was present, that my words carried meaning. I continued talking, careful not to react to this change. I explained that throughout my years studying primates, the most important lesson had been patience. Understanding requires time. Trust cannot be forced. Every species operates on its own timeline for comfort and communication. Wait for it, because day 7 is when everything exploded. I was sitting against the wall, discussing my time with mountain gorillas, when the Bigfoot suddenly turned and looked directly at me. Not a glance. Sustained eye contact. Its eyes were brown, almost amber under the fluorescent lighting, and incredibly expressive. In that moment, I witnessed recognition, this being understood that I was genuinely trying to help. Slowly, carefully, I pulled out a sketch pad and pencil. I drew a simple image, a stick figure representing myself and another representing the Bigfoot, standing side by side. I held it up. The Bigfoot studied the drawing for a long moment, then reached out one massive hand. I held my breath as those huge fingers delicately took the pad from me. It looked at the pencil, turned it over several times, examining it from every angle, then pressed it against the paper. Its first marks were shaky and uncertain, but then it began drawing with increasing confidence. When it handed the pad back, my heart nearly stopped beating. The Bigfoot had drawn trees, mountains, and 3 figures, one large, 2 smaller, a family. It had added details I hadn't included. Faces with clear expressions, hands reaching toward each other. This wasn't random scribbling or mimicry. This was representation, memory, loss. I looked up at the Bigfoot with tears streaming down my face. It watched me carefully, waiting to see if I understood. I did. Completely. This being had been captured away from its family. It missed them desperately. It was grieving. Over the following weeks, my relationship with the Bigfoot developed into something profound. We communicated through drawings, gestures, and increasingly sophisticated interactions. It solved every puzzle I presented, often discovering solutions I hadn't anticipated. It learned to identify written words, matching symbols to objects with remarkable speed. It even began understanding basic numerical concepts, counting objects and performing simple addition. The word recognition tests revealed something extraordinary. I would write simple words on cards, tree, water, food, sleep, and display them alongside corresponding images. Within just 3 sessions, the Bigfoot could match words to pictures with 100% accuracy. Then I introduced abstract concepts: happy, sad, tired, afraid. The Bigfoot studied these longer, thinking deeply, but eventually demonstrated understanding by creating drawings that illustrated each emotion. The drawing for sad showed a figure with slumped shoulders and downturned head. The drawing for happy showed a figure with arms raised. The drawing for afraid showed a figure backing away from something larger. The numerical ability absolutely astounded me. I started with basic object counting, arranging stones in groups, and having the Bigfoot indicate quantity. It quickly mastered counts up to 20 with complete reliability. Then I introduced basic addition using physical objects. I would place 3 stones on one side, 4 on another, then gesture for the total. The Bigfoot would carefully arrange 7 stones in response. This wasn't trained behavior or conditioned response. This was genuine mathematical reasoning, abstract thought, symbolic understanding. I documented everything with obsessive detail, every test result, every response, every innovation the being demonstrated. The pattern was absolutely unmistakable. This wasn't animal learning through conditioning and reinforcement. This was cognitive flexibility, abstract reasoning, symbolic thought, all definitive hallmarks of human-level intelligence. The facility director reviewed my reports with growing excitement, but his enthusiasm focused entirely on commercial and strategic implications. He talked excitedly about how a creature with human intelligence but ape physiology could revolutionize medical research, military applications, commercial development. He discussed patents and funding and international recognition. Listening to him made me physically ill. I tried steering conversations toward ethics. If this being possessed human-level cognition, didn't that create an obligation to treat it as we would treat a human? The director dismissed this as philosophical speculation, irrelevant to research protocols. The Bigfoot wasn't legally human, he argued, therefore human rights didn't apply. It was that simple in his worldview. But the most significant breakthrough came during a test involving mirrors. I had set up a full-length mirror in the cell, curious to see if the Bigfoot possessed self-awareness, the ability to recognize one's own reflection. Most animals fail this test catastrophically. They treat their reflection as another individual or ignore it completely. Only the most intelligent species pass: great apes, elephants, dolphins, and humans. The Bigfoot approached the mirror slowly, cautiously. It studied the reflection, moving closer, then stepping back. It raised one arm, watching the reflection mirror the movement perfectly. Then it did something I didn't expect. It touched its own face, then touched the mirror, then touched its face again. Understanding, recognition, self-awareness. But what happened next shook me to my absolute core. The Bigfoot turned away from the mirror and began to draw. This time, the drawing was more detailed and complex than anything before. It drew a tree, and in that tree, a face. Not a Bigfoot face, a human face. It added clothing, simple garments made from animal skins. It drew a campfire, tools, shelters. Then it created what I can only describe as a timeline. On the left side, humans and Bigfoots together. In the middle, some kind of conflict or separation, figures moving apart. On the right side, Bigfoots alone in the wilderness, humans in settlements and cities. I stared at these drawings for a long time, my mind racing through implications. What this being was showing me was history, shared history. The Bigfoot wasn't some undiscovered ape or evolutionary missing link. It was a relative, a cousin, a branch of the human family tree that had diverged long ago and adapted to life in the deep wilderness. While we built civilizations, they chose solitude. While we developed technology, they chose simplicity. While we sought to dominate nature, they chose to live within it. The implications crashed over me like a tidal wave. Bigfoots weren't animals, they were people. Different from us, yes, but fundamentally the same in all the ways that truly mattered. They had families, culture, memory. They grieved and hoped and dreamed and loved. And we had captured one, locked it in a concrete cell like a laboratory specimen. I presented my findings to the facility director in a comprehensive formal report. I documented everything: the mirror test, the drawings, the problem-solving abilities, the evidence of linguistic understanding, the timeline showing shared history. My conclusion was unambiguous and undeniable. This being possessed human-level intelligence and deserved to be treated accordingly. Continued captivity was fundamentally unethical. It needed to be released immediately and reunited with its family group. The director's response was immediate and absolutely chilling. Release was impossible, he stated flatly. The Bigfoot was far too valuable for research purposes. The facility intended to keep it indefinitely, permanently. In fact, they were already developing plans to capture additional Bigfoots to establish a breeding population. Let that sink in for a moment. A breeding population of intelligent beings against their will. They wanted to study Bigfoot genetics, physiology, behavior, cognition. They viewed this being not as a person, but as a breakthrough, a discovery that could revolutionize science and secure them unlimited funding and international prestige. I argued passionately. I pleaded desperately. I cited ethics protocols and international law regarding treatment of intelligent species. The director listened politely, then calmly informed me that my contract was complete. I was to pack my belongings and vacate the facility within 24 hours. A confidentiality agreement prevented me from discussing anything I'd witnessed. If I violated that agreement, I would face severe legal consequences: criminal prosecution, civil liability, professional destruction. He made the message crystal clear. Shut up and disappear. That night I couldn't sleep, couldn't even close my eyes. I kept thinking about the Bigfoot sitting alone in that cell, waiting for a freedom that would never come. I thought about its family somewhere out in those mountains, grieving a lost member, wondering what had happened. I thought about what we were doing, capturing and studying intelligent beings against their will, imprisoning people, and I felt physically sick. Around 3 in the morning, I made my decision. I was going to free the Bigfoot. I understood the risks completely. I understood I would likely be caught and prosecuted severely. But some things matter more than personal safety. Some lines cannot be crossed without resistance. Some moral imperatives override self-preservation. This was one of those moments. I spent the next day preparing meticulously. I studied the facility's security protocols with new eyes. I identified blind spots in camera coverage. I determined guard rotation schedules. Most importantly, I located the backup generator room and figured out how to trigger a controlled power outage that would last just long enough for an escape attempt. The planning required extraordinary attention to detail. This facility had multiple layers of security: badge-controlled doors, motion sensors, security cameras with night vision capability, roving guard patrols. Any escape attempt would need to account for all of these simultaneously. A simple power outage wouldn't be sufficient. I needed to create enough chaos and confusion to mask our movements long enough to reach the forest. I spent hours reviewing facility blueprints I'd been given during initial orientation. The generator room was located in the basement, accessible through a service corridor that saw minimal foot traffic. The backup generators would activate automatically after 30 seconds of power loss. But if I could disable the transfer switch and cut specific power lines, I could extend that window to 10 or 15 minutes, maybe 20 if I got lucky. The biggest challenge was timing. Guard rotations changed every 8 hours, with brief overlap periods during shift changes when communication was less coordinated and attention was divided. The optimal window would be during the night shift change at 11:30, when guards were distracted with handoff procedures and equipment checks. I gathered supplies discreetly throughout the day: a small flashlight from the break room, wire cutters from the maintenance closet, a detailed map of the surrounding forest from the facility library. I wore dark clothing and soft-soled shoes. Everything needed to be ready because I would only get one chance, one opportunity. If I failed, the Bigfoot would never have another. That evening, I visited the Bigfoot one final time. I brought the sketch pad and drew a detailed plan: the facility layout, the exit route, the forest beyond. The Bigfoot studied the drawings intently, massive fingers tracing the lines I'd made with obvious intelligence and understanding. Then it looked at me and touched the drawing of the trees outside, then touched the drawing of the cell, then pointed at itself and at me. The meaning was absolutely clear. It understood we would leave together. I nodded and drew one more image, a clock showing 11:30. The Bigfoot studied this longer, perhaps not fully understanding time measurement in our terms, but grasping that a specific moment was important, critical. I held up my hands with fingers spread. 10 minutes. Then I pointed to the door. The Bigfoot nodded slowly. We had a plan. At exactly 11:30 that night, I accessed the generator room using my still active security badge. I flipped the necessary switches and cut several key cables with the wire cutters. The facility plunged into absolute darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in after 30 seconds, but it was dim and sporadic, casting shadows everywhere. I had maybe 10 minutes before someone figured out what had happened and restored full power. I ran to the containment wing, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The electronic locks had failed during the power outage, reverting to manual mode. I pushed open the heavy door to the Bigfoot's cell. The being was standing in the center of the room, alert and tense, ready. I held up the sketch pad and drew quickly, a simple image of the door, the hallway, the forest outside. The Bigfoot understood immediately. It moved toward me but hesitated at the threshold, perhaps expecting a trick or a trap after weeks of captivity. I stepped aside and gestured urgently. "Go, now!" The Bigfoot looked at me for a long moment, one final assessment of trust, then stepped through the door. We moved through the facility together. Despite its massive size, the Bigfoot's footsteps were surprisingly quiet, demonstrating natural stealth developed over millennia of survival. We encountered one guard near the exit. The Bigfoot simply pushed past him, gently but with enough force to knock the man aside like a child. The guard shouted and reached for his radio, but we were already through the door and into the night. The forest was dark and cold, the temperature having dropped significantly since sunset. I'd grabbed a flashlight from the security office, but I kept it pointed at the ground to avoid attracting attention. Behind us, I could hear shouting, alarms. They'd discovered the escape. We needed to move fast. My breath formed visible clouds in the flashlight beam. The Bigfoot seemed completely unaffected by the cold, its thick fur providing natural insulation. But I was shivering within minutes, my light jacket inadequate for the mountain night. The terrain was absolutely brutal. We climbed steep slopes covered in loose rock that shifted treacherously underfoot. Fallen logs blocked our path, forcing detours through dense underbrush that tore at my clothes and face. The forest canopy blocked what little moonlight might have helped us navigate. Without the flashlight, I would have been completely blind and helpless. The Bigfoot moved with remarkable confidence despite the darkness and difficult terrain. Its night vision was clearly far superior to mine, and years of living in wilderness had taught it to navigate by feel, sound, and memory. Several times it would pause, sniff the air carefully, then adjust our direction slightly, reading signs and information I couldn't begin to perceive. After an hour of climbing, we reached a ridgeline where the trees thinned slightly. I looked back and could see flashlight beams in the distance, search teams spreading out from the facility like a net. They were still at least a mile behind us, but they had vehicles, radios, organization, resources. We had only determination and the Bigfoot's knowledge of terrain. We descended the far side of the ridge into a steep ravine. A stream ran through the bottom, swollen with snowmelt and moving dangerously fast. The Bigfoot waded in without hesitation, the water reaching mid-thigh on its massive frame. I followed more carefully, gasping at the icy shock. The current was strong enough that I had to brace against rocks to avoid being swept downstream. My legs went numb almost instantly. On the far bank I collapsed briefly, muscles trembling from cold and exhaustion. The Bigfoot waited patiently, occasionally looking back toward the lights in the distance. After a few minutes it touched my shoulder gently. A clear message: we needed to keep moving. I forced myself up, and we continued into deeper forest. The ground leveled out somewhat, though navigation remained extraordinarily difficult. We passed through sections of old-growth forest where massive trees created cathedral-like spaces beneath their branches. The forest floor was thick with needles and moss that muffled our footsteps. Despite my exhaustion, I felt a sense of awe at the wilderness surrounding us. The Bigfoot took the lead, navigating through dense undergrowth with natural ease that spoke of countless generations adapting to this environment. I struggled to keep up, branches tearing at my clothes and face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. We climbed steep hillsides and crossed more icy streams. Several times I fell, and each time the Bigfoot waited patiently, sometimes offering a massive hand to help me up with surprising gentleness. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 90 minutes, we reached a rocky outcropping overlooking a deep valley. The Bigfoot stopped and raised its head, sniffing the air with obvious intent. Then it cupped both hands around its mouth and made a sound, a long, resonant call that echoed through the mountains. It wasn't quite a howl, not quite a yell, something in between, haunting and beautiful and utterly alien. We waited in tense silence. I could still hear distant voices and the occasional sound of vehicles. The search teams were getting closer. I wondered if I should turn back, try to lead them away from the Bigfoot, sacrifice myself to ensure its escape. But before I could move or act, I heard a response from the valley below. Another call, similar to the first, but slightly different in pitch and rhythm. A voice answering across the darkness. The Bigfoot beside me made a sound I can only describe as joyful, a deep rumbling that came from its chest, vibrating through the air. It began moving down the rocky slope with renewed energy, half climbing and half sliding with urgency born of hope. I followed more carefully, not wanting to break my neck this close to success. At the bottom of the valley, 3 Bigfoots emerged from the tree line like shadows materializing into solid form. 2 were similar in size to the one I'd freed, adults, I assumed. The third was smaller, perhaps a juvenile, maybe 5 feet tall. They rushed forward, and the reunion was overwhelming to witness. The Bigfoots embraced, making soft vocalizations that carried layers of meaning I couldn't begin to understand. They touched each other's faces and hands with obvious emotion. The smaller Bigfoot jumped up and down excitedly, clearly overjoyed to have a lost family member returned. The vocalizations were unlike anything I'd heard before. Not quite language in the human sense, but far more complex than simple animal calls. There were variations in pitch, rhythm, duration that seemed to carry specific meaning. They responded to each other's sounds with clear comprehension, voices overlapping in what felt like genuine conversation rather than just back-and-forth calls. The physical greetings were remarkably tender and human-like. The adult Bigfoots wrapped their massive arms around the freed one, holding close for long moments. They touched its face, examined its hands and arms, checked for injuries or signs of harm with obvious concern. One of them, I assumed the mate based on body language and the intensity of attention, kept one hand on the freed Bigfoot's shoulder throughout, as if needing constant physical confirmation of its presence. The juvenile was perhaps 4 feet tall with lighter, almost reddish-brown fur and a more delicate frame. The young one circled the group excitedly, occasionally reaching out to touch the adult, expressing joy through movement, spinning, jumping, making high-pitched sounds that conveyed pure happiness. This reunion clearly meant everything to this young Bigfoot, who had undoubtedly spent weeks wondering if its family member would ever return. After several minutes of reunion, the freed Bigfoot turned toward me. The other Bigfoots tensed immediately, their bodies shifting into protective stances. The largest one, who I now understood was probably the father or elder male of the family, stepped partially in front of the group, positioning himself between me and the others. This was protective instinct, clear and unmistakable. The freed Bigfoot made calming gestures and vocalizations. It pointed to me, then to the direction of the facility, then to itself. The other Bigfoots watched intently as it seemed to explain what had happened. It used hand gestures alongside vocalizations, painting a picture of captivity and escape that the family clearly understood. The largest Bigfoot approached me slowly. Up close, he was even more imposing than the one I'd freed, perhaps 8.5 feet tall, with shoulders as broad as a doorframe. Those massive hands could have crushed my skull effortlessly, but the movements were careful, deliberate, non-threatening despite the obvious power. It studied me for a long moment, dark eyes examining my face with an intelligence that made my breath catch. Then it reached into the fur at its chest and pulled out something small, carved wood. It had been prepared in advance, perhaps carried for years, waiting for an occasion that required formal acknowledgement. The Bigfoot presented it to me with both hands, a gesture I recognized as ceremonial from my anthropological training. I accepted the carving carefully, holding it up to examine in the dim light. The detail was extraordinary. Every line had been etched with precision, creating patterns that were simultaneously geometric and organic. Looking at it, I felt certain this represented something profoundly important in Bigfoot culture, perhaps a symbol of gratitude, protection, acknowledgement of debt. The female Bigfoot, I assumed the mother, approached next. She touched my shoulder briefly, a fleeting contact that nonetheless communicated volumes. Her eyes were gentler than the male's, filled with something I could only interpret as maternal gratitude. I had returned her family member. Nothing could fully repay that, but the acknowledgement mattered deeply. The juvenile watched from behind the adults, curious but cautious. It made soft, questioning sounds, and the freed Bigfoot responded with what seemed like reassurances. The young one ventured closer, reaching out one tentative hand to touch my jacket. I remained perfectly still as small fingers explored the fabric, learning texture and material through touch. Then it retreated back to the safety of the adults, satisfied with the investigation. The family group formed a loose circle around me for a moment, a gesture that felt ceremonial and deeply significant. They were including me briefly in their social unit, acknowledging me as someone who had earned trust and respect. It lasted perhaps 30 seconds, but the weight of it was profound. I was witnessing something no scientist had ever documented: Bigfoot social protocol, family structure, emotional expression, and cross-species communication all at once. The freed Bigfoot placed one enormous hand on my shoulder gently, carefully, aware of its own strength. Then it turned to the others and made a series of sounds, gestures, and what I can only describe as explanations. The other Bigfoots looked at me with what seemed like understanding and acceptance. One of them stepped forward and offered me something, a small carved piece of wood shaped like a leaf with intricate patterns etched into its surface. I accepted the gift, deeply moved. This was more than gratitude. This was acknowledgement, recognition of what I'd done and what it meant. They were welcoming me, however briefly, into their circle. Behind us, the sounds of the search party grew unmistakably louder. Flashlight beams swept through the trees above the valley. The Bigfoots heard it too. The largest one made a low warning sound. They needed to leave. Now. And so did I. The Bigfoot I had freed touched my face once, very gently, a gesture of farewell that nearly broke me, and turned away. The family group moved into the forest with incredible speed and silence that defied their size. Within moments, they had vanished completely, as if they had never been there at all, as if they were ghosts or dreams. I stood alone in the dark valley, holding the carved wood in my hand, feeling its weight. I knew I should run, should try to escape before the search teams found me, but I was exhausted physically and emotionally, and, honestly, part of me felt that running would be pointless. They would catch me eventually. Better to face it now with dignity than to be hunted down like an animal. I climbed back up the slope and waited. 10 minutes later, flashlights found me. Armed security personnel surrounded me immediately, weapons drawn and pointed at my chest. They searched me roughly, confiscated the carved wood, and put me in handcuffs. No one spoke to me during the long walk back to the facility. No one needed to. We all knew what I had done and what would happen next. They held me at the facility for 3 days before transferring me to a federal detention center. During that time, I was interrogated extensively, aggressively, relentlessly. Where had I taken the Bigfoot? Had I had outside help? Did I have contacts in activist organizations? What was I planning to do with the information I'd gathered? I told them everything except the location of the valley where the Bigfoot family had reunited. That information I kept to myself, no matter how much pressure they applied, no matter what they threatened. The formal charges were eventually filed: destruction of federal property, theft of research materials, sabotage of government operations, and violation of national security protocols. Each charge carried significant prison time. My lawyer, a public defender who seemed overwhelmed by the complexity of the case, explained that I was looking at a minimum of 20 years, possibly much more. The government offered a deal. If I cooperated fully, provided all my research notes, revealed the location where I'd released the Bigfoot, and testified about everything I'd learned, they would reduce the charges to a single count of unauthorized access. I would still serve time, but perhaps only 5 to 7 years instead of decades. I refused immediately. I had destroyed my research notes the night before my arrest, burning them in my hotel room sink. I would not be party to hunting down that family or any other Bigfoots. The government claimed they wanted to study them humanely, to learn from them, to protect them. But I had seen firsthand what their protection looked like: captivity, isolation, treatment as objects rather than people. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented their case methodically and effectively. Security footage showing me sabotaging the generator, testimony from facility staff about my increasingly close relationship with the Bigfoot, documentation of the escape and my apprehension. They painted me as a radical, someone who had valued an animal over human law and order, someone dangerous who couldn't be trusted. Each day of the trial followed the same exhausting pattern. Morning session from 9 to noon, afternoon session from 2 to 5. The courtroom was formal and intimidating. Dark wood paneling, a high judge's bench, the American flag standing in the corner. I sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting suit my lawyer had provided, listening to witness after witness describe my crimes. The facility director testified for an entire day. He described the Bigfoot as an invaluable research specimen, a once-in-a-lifetime breakthrough that could advance science by decades. He explained the security measures in place, the cost of the containment facility, the international implications of the research. He made it sound as though I had destroyed something irreplaceable and precious. Guards testified about the escape itself. They described the chaos, the confusion, the moment they discovered the Bigfoot missing. One guard had been injured slightly when the Bigfoot pushed past him. The prosecution made much of this, suggesting the creature was dangerous and that I had endangered human lives. The fact that the guard's injury amounted to nothing more than a bruised shoulder was conveniently downplayed. My defense was simple and honest. I didn't deny any of the facts. Yes, I freed the Bigfoot. Yes, I destroyed facility property in the process, but I argued that what I had encountered was not an animal subject to property law. The Bigfoot was a person, intelligent, self-aware, capable of abstract thought and emotional depth. Keeping it captive was a crime against its fundamental rights as a sentient being. The prosecution objected repeatedly. The judge sustained most of those objections. My testimony about the Bigfoot's abilities was deemed irrelevant to the question of whether I had violated federal law. The court was not interested in philosophical questions about personhood or rights. The court only cared about what I had done and whether it was illegal. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning their verdict: guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing took place on a cold morning in early winter. The courtroom was packed with observers, government officials, journalists who had caught wind of the strange case, supporters who believed in what I had done. The judge reviewed the charges and the jury's verdict in a cold, formal voice. Then the judge asked if I had anything to say before sentence was pronounced. I stood and faced the court, my hands shaking but my voice steady. I explained what I had learned during my time with the Bigfoot. I described the drawings, the mirror test, the problem-solving abilities, the evidence of shared history. I talked about the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with an animal but with a person, someone's family member, someone with memories and feelings and hopes. I said that I understood the court considered my actions criminal. I accepted that. But I also wanted the record to reflect that I believed I had made the only moral choice available to me. When faced with the imprisonment of an intelligent, feeling being who had done nothing wrong, I chose compassion over compliance. I would make that choice again. The judge listened without expression. When I finished, the judge spoke in measured tones. The court recognized that I had acted on principle, the judge said. But the court also had an obligation to uphold the law. The charges against me were serious. The damage to government property and operations was significant. The court needed to send a message that such actions would not be tolerated regardless of motivation. The sentence: 35 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. I heard gasps from the gallery behind me. My lawyer dropped his pen. Even the prosecutor looked shocked. 35 years was far more than anyone had expected. At my age, it was effectively a life sentence. I would be an old man before I had any chance of freedom. And given my health and the conditions of federal prison, I might never leave at all. The judge concluded the hearing, and I was led away in handcuffs. As I passed through the courtroom door, I glanced back one last time. In the back row, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A person I didn't recognize, wearing a heavy coat and a hood pulled low. But as our eyes met, the person pulled back the hood slightly, revealing features that were not quite human. Dark eyes, a heavy brow, a knowing look. It was impossible. Bigfoots didn't come into cities. They avoided humans at all costs. But there was no mistaking what I saw. One of them had come to witness the sentencing. Perhaps to understand what had happened to me, perhaps to pay respects, perhaps simply to remember the human who had helped them. Then the door closed, and the figure was gone. I was led down a long corridor toward a transport vehicle that would take me to prison. Federal prison is exactly as grim as you imagine, probably worse. Small cells, bad food, constant noise, violent inmates, overworked guards. Every day blends into the next in a gray monotony that is its own kind of torture. My cell measured 8 feet by 10 feet. A metal bunk bed occupied one wall, though I had no cellmate initially. A small metal desk and stool were bolted to the floor. A combination toilet and sink unit sat in the corner, offering zero privacy. A single narrow window positioned too high to see out of properly let in a gray rectangle of light during daytime hours. The sounds of prison are absolutely relentless. Metal doors slamming at all hours, guards shouting commands during counts and movements, inmates arguing, laughing, crying. The ventilation system created a constant low drone that never ever stopped. Silence never comes in prison. Even at night, There are always sounds: coughing, snoring, the shuffle of guards on patrol, the occasional scream or fight breaking out in another cell block. The daily routine was rigid and unchanging. Wake at 5:30 for count. Breakfast at 6, usually cold oatmeal or powdered eggs that tasted like cardboard. Work assignment from 7 to 11. I was eventually placed in the kitchen, washing dishes and preparing vegetables. Lunch at noon, recreation yard from 1 to 3 if weather permitted, dinner at 5, evening count at 6, lockdown at 8, lights out at 10, every single day, year after year after year. The food was barely adequate for survival. Portions were small, quality was abysmal, nutrition was minimal. Everything tasted vaguely the same: bland, overcooked, institutional. Fresh fruits and vegetables were rare luxuries. Most meals consisted of processed carbohydrates and mystery meat that could have been anything. I lost 30 pounds in the first year despite being sedentary most of the day. The library became my sanctuary and salvation. It was open 3 afternoons per week for 2 hours each session. The collection was surprisingly extensive: donated books from various sources, organized haphazardly on metal shelves. I read voraciously, desperately: fiction, non-fiction, science, history, philosophy. Reading let me escape the cell walls, at least mentally. I worked my way through entire sections, all of Steinbeck, most of Hemingway, the complete works of Shakespeare. I particularly gravitated toward books about nature and wildlife. Reading about forests and mountains and wild places helped me stay connected to the world outside these walls. I would close my eyes and imagine myself back in those environments, feeling wind on my face, smelling pine and earth, hearing bird calls and rustling leaves. These mental exercises kept me sane through the worst periods. In my 10th year, something extraordinary happened. I received a letter delivered through standard prison mail. There was no return address. The postmark was from a small town in northern Montana. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a drawing. I recognized the style immediately, the same technique the Bigfoot had used during our sessions together a decade earlier. But this drawing was more elaborate than any I had seen before. The drawing showed a tree with many branches, a family tree. At the base were 2 large figures, Bigfoots. From them, several branches extended upward. Some branches ended quickly. Others continued higher, splitting into smaller branches. At the top of the tallest branch were 5 small figures, a family group. I stared at the drawing for a long time before understanding flooded through me like light breaking through darkness. This was a family tree. The Bigfoot I had freed was one of the large figures at the base. The branches were descendants. The 5 small figures at the top were the current generation. The Bigfoot was telling me that the family was thriving, growing, continuing, and I had played a part in that. But there was more. In one corner of the drawing, separate from the tree, was a small figure that was clearly meant to be me. And from that figure, a line extended to the family tree, connecting to the branch where the freed Bigfoot stood. I was part of their story now, not as a Bigfoot, not as family in the biological sense, but as someone who had helped them and would be remembered. The drawing was a gift, a thank you that spanned 10 years and countless miles. I don't know how the drawing reached me. Someone must have helped. A sympathetic human who understood what the Bigfoot wanted to communicate, but whoever it was, they remained anonymous. I keep that drawing with the carved wood now, hidden behind a loose brick in my cell wall. They are my treasures, my proof that what I did mattered. I'm writing this now because my health is failing rapidly. 12 years in federal prison has taken its toll on my body. The doctors here do what they can with limited resources, but I'm not a priority case. I have perhaps a year left, maybe less, probably less. I will die here. I will never experience freedom again. I will never see mountains or forests except in my dreams and memories. My name will be recorded in legal databases as a criminal, a saboteur, someone who prioritized an animal over human law. But I have no regrets, none whatsoever. What I did was right. The Bigfoot I freed was not an animal or property or a research subject. It was a person, and people deserve freedom. If I could go back and make the decision again, knowing everything that would follow, the arrest, the trial, the decades in prison, the slow decline of my health, I would still open that cell door. I would still help that being escape. I would still choose compassion over compliance. Because some things are more important than personal comfort or safety. Some moral lines are so fundamental that crossing them is simply not an option, regardless of the consequences. I hope that someday, long after I'm gone, attitudes will change. I hope humans will come to see Bigfoots not as creatures to be captured and studied, but as intelligent beings with rights that must be respected. I hope the forests where they live will be protected, not for our recreation or resource extraction, but because they are home to people who have as much right to exist as we do. That change will come slowly, if it comes at all. But I have faith that it will, because despite everything, despite the government's secrecy, despite my imprisonment, despite the forces that want to keep Bigfoots hidden or controlled, the truth has a way of emerging. Other scientists will eventually encounter Bigfoots. Other people will see what I saw, and not all of them will be willing to stay. Silent. Slowly, gradually, the world will come to understand what Bigfoots really are. And when that happens, everything will change. I won't live to see it, but knowing that it will happen eventually is enough. I played my small part in that larger story. I helped one Bigfoot return to its family. That one act, and the consequences I accepted for it, will ripple forward through time in ways I cannot predict or control. If you're reading this, then somehow my story has survived. Perhaps the lawyers who visited me preserved it. Perhaps someone leaked the classified files. Perhaps the truth about Bigfoots has finally come to light and people are searching for early accounts of human-Bigfoot interaction. Whatever the circumstances, I want you to know this. Bigfoots are people. Real people with thoughts and feelings and families. They deserve the same basic rights we claim for ourselves. Freedom, safety, the ability to live without fear of capture or harm. If you encounter a Bigfoot, don't see an animal or a specimen or a discovery that will make you famous. See a person, someone's family member, someone who has chosen to live apart from human civilization and deserves to have that choice respected. Protect them. Speak for them. Don't allow them to be captured or studied against their will. The scientific knowledge we might gain is not worth the cost to their freedom and dignity. I spent 35 years in prison for freeing one Bigfoot. It was worth every single day, every hour, every moment of suffering, because that Bigfoot is free. That Bigfoot has a family. That Bigfoot's descendants are still out there, living the life they chose. And that matters more than my comfort, my freedom, or my life. If you remember nothing else from this account, remember that. Remember that Bigfoots are people. Remember that they deserve freedom. Remember that standing up for what's right sometimes means sacrificing everything. And remember that it's always, always worth it. I'm writing these final words on what I suspect will be one of my last good days. The doctors have been honest with me about the decline ahead. I have weeks, perhaps a month. Then nothing. I'm not afraid. Death comes for all of us eventually. What matters is how we live, what choices we make, what we stand for when the stakes are highest. I stood for compassion, for dignity, for the fundamental right of intelligent beings to live freely, and I will die knowing that I made a difference, however small, in the life of one Bigfoot and its family. That's enough. That's everything. To the Bigfoot I freed, thank you for trusting me. Thank you for the drawings and the carved wood. Thank you for letting me be part of your story. I hope you're still out there, still free, still with your family. To anyone reading this, do the right thing, even when it costs you everything. That's what it means to be truly human. And to the Bigfoots, wherever you are, stay hidden, stay safe, stay free. You chose a different path than we did, and it was the wiser choice. May you continue to walk it for generations to come, far from the reach of those who would not understand. This is my story. This is my truth. This is why I face the rest of my days behind bars with no regrets. I freed a Bigfoot, and I would do it again.